What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. A somewhat common area of discussion amongst Pokemon fans is the changes that the individual monsters have shown over the years, most frequently referring to the old sprites, how weird some of them are, or just downright disturbing. However, nobody really talks about it the other way. And for good reason. Most all of the 3D models that were created made the Pokemon look exactly like you've seen them in their artwork or in the anime. Instances like Lucario especially made vast improvements over the 2D sprites that never quite looked right. But if you ask me, there were at least some Pokemon that were made a bit murkier by the transition to the third dimension. So, here are the top 6 Pokemon that were better off before their 3D models. Number 6. Metapod. Now you might be asking, what's wrong with Metapod's 3D model? It looks perfectly fine. Well, it does, and this might just be me, but is this always the way Metapod has been facing? Because at least when I was younger, it seems like half of the time Metapod was pointed the opposite way. There's a big protrusion on the back, and when seen from the side, it resembles a nose, and even more so when viewed from straight on. But apparently this is actually its back. But if that's the case, then why are the eyes so much closer at this angle? At the other end, they're basically on the back of its head. Otherwise, it's just a big spike, I guess? I think the main issue might actually be with Kakuna, since that one is pretty clear-cut, so I expected Metapod to be the same, just pointier. But with the 3D model, it's completely flipped around, having all the extra detail work on the back as a shield or something. But in this case, its eyes, instead of looking annoyed to angry, now look unenthused to depressed. So, not that anyone would be threatened by Metapod before, but now they might actually relish in taking it out with the eyes and that pretentious stare. I don't know that there's ever been a change in a Pokemon's in-game stance so drastic that it made me fundamentally change the way that I've seen the Pokemon for years, and question the way that I've always looked at them. Then again, I know what people say about the nose, but I still can't make myself see Diglett with anything other than a mouth, so people see what they want, I guess. Number 5. Pharisee. Pharisee has a rather distinctive look, if not incredibly complex, so there's not really too much for there to actually change on this Steel-type burr. The design aspects are recognizably the same across the generations, however something else happened in the transfer to a new console. Looking at Pharisee's 3D model, it doesn't really move at all. Now this does make sense, I suppose, as it's still a developing lump of metal. It can fire out its spikes, which is pretty cool, but otherwise it sits as still as a statue. The only reason I find this strange is because when we look at the Gen 5 sprite, Pharisee is extremely active. This thing is spinning like mad. It's some kind of grass-type top of death. Seriously, if you tried to touch it, your hand would be ripped to shreds. But how could Pharisee go from having so much energy that it can barely contain it, to completely stoic and uninterested in even giving the slightest jiggle? The only other Pokemon that I can think of that was changed in the same manner was Hitmontop, who went from likewise wildly spinning to standing straight up and doing the sidestep. So maybe they just are anti-spinning? Or maybe that's just what you do if you're part of this evolutionary line, since Ferrothorn also changed the way that it works. In Unova, it appears to be suspended by its 3 extensions, evidenced by pulling itself up and then hanging back down. However, once it became a 3D model, it flipped to no longer be dangling, but instead holds itself up as if they were legs. Both of these variations struck me as quite odd, since they seemingly characterize these rough and tumbleweeds in directly opposing manners. So it makes me wonder if they even had concept meetings during the transitioning phase to the new so-called future-proof models. Number 4. Nidoking. Nidoking is one of my favorite first-gen Pokemon. It's been a powerhouse since the early days of the franchise. You'd think that sort of elite status would get you a decent photo when you have to update it, but I guess not even a king can always be photogenic. There's something about Nidoking's 3D model that's just off. His eyes are definitely too small and too far apart, and the rest of his body lacks the same proportions that have always been given off in the past. Or in any other side material for that matter, his body simply commands a more intimidating presence when it's drawn. I think maybe the model has its tail too big, and that makes him hunch over, which in turn makes the rest of it look tiny in comparison. and the head seems a bit too small, aside from the fact that it looks nothing like Nidoking's face. I mean, look at Nidoqueen. Perfect proportions, eyes properly positioned, and in the same style that we've always seen them. So why couldn't they do the same for her counterpart? And all of the rest of the Nido family seems fine as well. So I don't know why the Patriarch gets so many weird defects that are clearly different from every time we've seen them before. Is it just to make them appear tougher? Because other Gen 1 big shots are still perfectly recognizable and are simply computerized versions of their old selves. I mean, I could still pick Nidoking out of a lineup, I guess, but you would have to keep the coloring to give me a hint. Number 3. Garchomp. Another strong favorite representation for its region, the Garchomp line is the sole reason a Pokémon as strong as Flygon can still be considered an underdog. A Land Shark jet plane is a hard enough balance to strike for a design, but they settled on something that was pulled off rather nicely. After all, it is an incredibly distinctive shape, so how could you mess it up? Well, evidently the answer is to flatten its face until it's unrecognizable, like the aliens in Star Trek Insurrection. Well, what's a reference people would actually understand? Flubber? Sure, let's go with Flubber. I do sort of take issue with the engorging of the limbs, but I guess that's for realistic stability? Even though realistic stability doesn't really seem to be a problem they care about recently. But the main problem here is that Garchomp is apparently trying to change its identity because the plastic surgery on display is absurd. And I don't think it's just an angle change looking at the head straight on versus tilted up, because once again the eyes are much further apart and the whole neck is huge. But this is just basic geometry. The 3D model head clearly is in the shape of a triangle, and every other time we see Garchomp, it's far more rounded, basically just being 3 loosely connected cylinders. Now this might be more accurate to say real-life hammerhead sharks, but again, that's not their job. Their job was to transfer existing designs into a 3D interpretation. All they had to do was look back at the other 2 previous stages and see how it didn't take over their whole face shape. Or even the Megaform. They had to be making the Megaform at the same time as the regular 3D model. So did no one notice how its face appears to be a better representation of the original design? At least for the top half, anyway. I just don't see why Garchomp has to look like such a flat top compared to its look everywhere else, and even by its other evolutions. But I'll stop insulting its cosmetic misfortunes and go on to something truly terrible. Number 2. Wooper. So there's not really much wrong with Wooper in its 3D model. I mean, it does have one of the worst gender differences to me, but that was established way back in Gen 4. Looking at it in its idle stance, there's really nothing to make it objectionable. However, the second it opens its mouth, I become extremely irritated. Wooper's mouth is quite big, so it's particularly noticeable that when inflated to the 3rd dimension, Wooper doesn't really have a mouth. I mean, there is one for show, but it's clearly painted on. The physical shape of Wooper's head doesn't change in the slightest, with only a few pixels sliding around to give the illusion that this creature can still eat. This is clearly an issue with the people making the models rather than the actual design, but it's pretty glaring when even its evolution was afforded the decency of creating a small cavity in its face. I'm not a computer programmer, but it can't be that hard. If you can put in the effort to make sure that Wobbuffet has a proper mouth, surely you can do it on a slightly smaller scale. Now this isn't exactly an exclusive problem to the small waterfish Pokémon. Even some brand new Pokémon are starting out with this infuriating brand of minimal effort. But I simply find it the most egregious with Wooper. When its face is a good 60% mouth, it produces 0 negative space when viewed from the side. Come on guys, we're supposed to be moving forward with these better graphics, but it doesn't work if you cut corners. Number 1. The Cyndaquil line. To me, without a doubt, the worst group of Pokémon to transfer to their 3D sprites was the Fire-type starter family from the Johto region. I do like these Pokémon, especially the middle stage. Kulava is one of the coolest Pokémon out there, and part of that rad persona comes from the flames emanating from these Pokémon. Most all Fire-type starters have some sort of fire coming off of their body. In fact, I think Cinderace might have been the first one not to have an open flame anywhere in the design. But even common Fire-types share in this trait. There are numerous theories as to why this is the case, such as being the only way to regulate body temperature so they don't overheat. But apparently that's not a problem for Cyndaquil, because ever since the line became 3D models, they've all but shut down their fire spouts. Now, we've always known that they could control this feature of their body, unlike, say, Charmander, but now they barely do it at all. Only when firing off attacks do quick spurts of fire erupt from the marked spots on their body, and then go right back out just as quickly. Honestly, the opposite seems like it should be true, but it's like they don't even have enough energy to even pretend to be threatening to their foe. It'd be like saying, we know that Solrock can float, but let's just animate it on the ground this time. Or what if they just stopped having Torkoal constantly billowing out smoke? That's his whole thing! How can they just deny his very being? Kulava, one of my favorite middle evolutions, legitimately doesn't even look like the same Pokémon without the flaming mohawk. It made sense in theory, but stripping the Cyndaquil line of their defining features made the Pokémon far less interesting and just that little bit more bland. Just think, someone who started playing Pokémon only since the 3D sprites have been used might have otherwise picked Typhlosion as one of their favorites, but now they just blend into the crowd of hundreds of other Pokémon. Although, it might be cool if there were regional variants that kept us guessing as to what might pop out of those spouts. So, those are the top 6 Pokémon whose 3D models actually made them look worse. And that's not to say anything about the animations controversy. Which official computer renderings of Pokémon do you find most problematic? Let me know down in the comments. Also, be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. We'll see you around next time!